Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight for the Northwest Consumer Law Center webinar series. Tonight's webinar is When Mortgage Forbearance Ends, What Happens Next? My name is Amanda Martin, and I'm the Executive Director of the Northwest Consumer Law Center. If you have questions during this presentation, please enter those in the chat box on your right. I'll be answering questions at the end of my presentation. The session is being recorded and will be available to view later on our website. Attending this webinar does not create an attorney-client relationship. This webinar will provide legal information only, so it is not a substitute for individualized legal advice. If you're seeking legal advice, I encourage you to contact Northwest Consumer Law Center after this webinar. Information about how to apply for our services will be posted at the end of my presentation. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic has had devastating impacts on American families. Nationally, it's estimated that over 4.7 million Americans took advantage of COVID-19 related mortgage forbearances. So if you're one of the people who are struggling to pay their mortgages during the pandemic, you're not alone. We know that the number of homeowners in forbearance has gone down as businesses are reopening and people are getting back to work. But we expect the financial fallout from the pandemic to continue to plague Washington families for years to come. That's why we're here to help, and why tonight we're going to give you the information you need to get back on track on your mortgage after your forbearance. Tonight's presentation, we are going to do a quick overview of mortgage forbearances. We did a whole webinar a few months back specifically about the different types of forbearances and which options are available based off what kind of mortgage you have. And that's available to view on our website at northwestconsumerlawcenter.org/COVID-19. So if you're questioning whether you should get a forbearance or what kind of forbearance that you're eligible for, I encourage you to go back and watch that webinar available on our website. Tonight's webinar is really going to be focused on what happens after your forbearance ends. So we're going to talk about options to avoid foreclosure, and if you are not able to avoid foreclosure, non-retention options. We're going to do a quick overview of the foreclosure process so you know what things to look for. And then we're going to talk about best practices when you're dealing with your mortgage servicer after a forbearance. So first, let's just do a quick overview about a forbearance, what it is, what it isn't. So what is a mortgage forbearance? A forbearance is an agreement with your mortgage servicer to skip essentially a number of payments due to a financial hardship. As we all know, there's specific COVID-19 related forbearances that various mortgage servicers are offering. Some forbearances are as short as 1 month, others are as long as 12 months. The length of the forbearance and the exact terms all depends on who owns your mortgage, which we cover in our forbearance webinar available on our website. Let's talk more importantly about what forbearance is not. Forbearance is not forgiveness. The payments that you miss during the forbearance, they do not just go away or get forgiven. Those have to be paid at some point. So the big question is when those have to be made, and that's going to determine what you do after your forbearance ends. So our big question again is what happens to the missed payments? Again, forbearance is not forgiveness. You will have to make up those missed payments at some point. Some government-backed loans are offering to put those payments at the end of your mortgage term. So if you're in a 30-year mortgage, those, let's say, for example, 3 missed payments would be due at the end of your mortgage, whether you paid it off in the 30-year note, or if you're selling your house, for example, you'd have to make up those 3 missed payments at that time. If your mortgage servicer offers that to put those payments at the end, that's great. And that means you should be current on your mortgage forbearance or current on your mortgage when your forbearance ends. And we'll talk a little bit more at the end of the presentation, best practices to make sure that that gets in place. But we're going to spend the bulk of the time talking about what happens if those payments are suddenly due at the end of your forbearance period, because that's where we see people running into the most amount of problems. If those payments become due at the end of your forbearance period, you're going to need to find a solution to get current on your mortgage if you don't have the funds to become current on your loan. So let's talk about options to avoid foreclosure. So, if you're in the situation, your 3-month forbearance ends on September 30th, October 1st, you're going to get that bill for July, August, September, and then October. And if you've been out of work like many people during the pandemic, you're not necessarily going to have the funds to become current. So we're talking about right now options for people in those situations. You might be eligible for another forbearance. Like I said earlier in the presentation, some forbearances last 1 month, some go all the way up to 12. Many servicers are offering forbearance in 3-month periods where you would need to recertify at the end of the 3-month period that you are still going through a financial hardship due to COVID-19. If you are in that situation where your financial hardship is still ongoing, make sure you contact your mortgage servicer about at least a month before your forbearance ends, so that way you have time to get the next forbearance in place. The other option is payment deferral. We talked a little bit about this. Some servicers are offering to put those missed payments at the end of your loan. This varies based off who owns your mortgage. So I highly recommend that if you're interested in that option, you contact your mortgage servicer right away so you know the steps you need to take in order to get that in place. I highly doubt that any mortgage servicer is going to automatically do this. And if they say they do, you're definitely going to want to just continue to follow up, get that confirmed in your mortgage statement so that way you know that you're current on your mortgage when that forbearance ends. The third option I want to talk about tonight is a loan modification. This is a good option potentially for somebody who cannot afford their ongoing payments. So let's say your income has decreased due to COVID, but you still have some income in order to afford a mortgage payment. You might want to think about applying for a loan modification. A loan modification takes the amount that you're behind on the mortgage and puts it back into the loan. The whole goal of a loan modification is to get an affordable monthly payment. And some programs are anywhere between 30 to 50% of your gross monthly income. That's what they consider an affordable payment. The way they get you that affordable payment is by lowering the interest rate, extending the term of the loan. So if you are 10 years into your 30-year mortgage, they might extend it another 10 years. They could even extend it out to a total of 40 years in some situations. Other times they will do a balloon payment, so they will forbear a large chunk of the loan and put that at the end. So the whole point of loan modification is not to necessarily to pay off your loan as quick as you can, but to get you an affordable payment. In order to get a loan modification, you have to submit an application. It involves a lot of paperwork. If you're interested in that option, I highly recommend that you contact a housing counselor or an attorney who can help you through that process. The fourth option I want to talk about tonight is a Chapter 13 bankruptcy. I'll start by saying if you are considering filing for bankruptcy, please speak with a qualified bankruptcy attorney first. There are many, many different factors that go into whether you're eligible for bankruptcy and whether filing for bankruptcy is within your best interest. So I highly recommend that you get some legal advice first about whether or not to file. That said, in some, Chapter 13 is a repayment plan. For people who are behind on their mortgages, they would pay their ongoing monthly payment, and then they would pay what they're behind on that mortgage and the repayment plan. And that's over a 3 to 5 year plan. The Chapter 13 is a really good option for somebody who had a temporary hardship. Now they're going back to work. They can afford to pay a little extra per month to catch up on their mortgage, but they can't necessarily afford to pay the full 3 months they missed at once. That would be the ideal situation for someone in a Chapter 13. If you're interested in Chapter 13 bankruptcy, we have a great pro se clinic for people under a certain income level. If you're interested in that clinic, please feel free to contact us after the presentation. Next, we're going to talk about non-retention options. So these are options for people who your financial hardship is long-term and you come to the hard decision that you're not able to afford your home, or this might not be the best financial decision to continue being in this mortgage. First and foremost, if you have equity in your home, meaning that your home is worth more than what you owe on the loan, you can sell the house at any point before a foreclosure sale. So if you have equity, you've made the hard decision that, it's time to sell this house, speak with a licensed real estate agent to talk about those options. The options that are listed here are really for people who don't have equity in their house. They're underwater. They owe more on their mortgage than what their house is worth. The first option is called a deed in lieu. This is essentially signing over the house to the mortgage company. Again, if you have equity in your house, I would highly not recommend this option. The second option is a short sale. So this is essentially the bank agreeing that you can sell the house for less than what's owed. There's a variety of different short sale programs out there, and I would recommend talking to a real estate agent if you're interested in one of those options. The third option on here is cash for keys. This is usually either in combination with some of the other non-retention options, or if you're in the spot where foreclosure is unavoidable, you can't do a short sale or deed in lieu for whatever reason, you can negotiate cash for keys. Cash for keys is essentially saying you are going to move out of the home. You're going to take all of your belongings. You are not going to destroy the property. You're not necessarily going to make repairs or fix it up. But it's agreeing to return the property to the bank or the new owner of the property after foreclosure in the condition that it's in. So that would be another option for people who aren't able to keep their homes. Next, we're going to move on to talking about the foreclosure process. The foreclosure process could be a whole webinar in itself, but I think it's important to talk about when we're talking about forbearances and loss mitigation options, so that way you know what to look for. In Washington State, there's two types of foreclosures. There's non-judicial foreclosure and judicial foreclosure. Non-judicial foreclosure is the most common type of foreclosure in Washington State. Non-judicial foreclosure involves a series of notices that are mailed to you via regular mail and certified mail. The first of these notices is called the Notice of Pre-Foreclosure Options. So if you are behind on your mortgage, the very first thing you want to look for, it'll say in big letters at the top, not Notice of Pre-Foreclosure Options. The other notices are the Notice of Default and the Notice of Trustee Sale. These notices are very important because they give you rights under the Foreclosure Fairness Act to contact your mortgage servicer, to have a meet and confer with your mortgage servicer, to have a mediation. And the deadlines for protecting these rights is based off of when you receive the notices. So it's very important that if you receive any of these, that you respond right away. You contact a housing counselor or an attorney who's experienced in this area, so that way they can help you protect your rights under the Foreclosure Fairness Act. Non-judicial foreclosure can happen as quickly as 6 months if you do nothing. So that's a kind of a general timeline for a non-judicial foreclosure. If you are enforcing your rights to meet and confer and to do mediation, the non-judicial foreclosure process typically takes much longer. Second, there's judicial foreclosure. A judicial foreclosure is just like any other lawsuit. It starts with service of a summons and complaint of legal documents on you or somebody that you live with. Typically, summons and complaint you have 20 days to respond from the date that you are served. Judicial foreclosure can happen pretty quickly, so it's very important that if you are served with a summons and complaint for a judicial foreclosure or really any type of legal proceeding, you talk to an attorney right away, so that way you can respond right away. Next, we're going to talk about best practices when dealing with a mortgage servicer after forbearance. My number one tip is keep making your payments if you're able to. So if you are considering a forbearance, but you're able to make your payments, highly recommend that you keep making your payments. If you are at the point where your payment's getting deferred, the forbeared payments are getting deferred to the end of the year loan, and now you're current, keep making your mortgage payments if you're able to. My second tip is learn what happens to the missed payments. You're going to need to know that right away. If you are at the initial stages of applying a forbearance, ask your mortgage servicer. Get it in writing about what happens. You're going to want to know whether you're going to have a big bill that comes due on October 1st, or if those payments are going to be put at the end of your loan. My third tip is to check your mortgage statements. Your mortgage statements should match what your mortgage servicer is telling you. If your mortgage servicer tells you that they're going to put all the forbeared payments due at the end of your loan, you need to make sure your mortgage statement matches that. If they tell you that and you still have a bill for 4+ mortgage payments that are due, there's a problem. You need to talk to a housing counselor or an attorney right away in order to get that checked out. Finally, you should document all communications regarding your mortgage. So if you are on the phone with your mortgage servicer, write down the date, the time, who you spoke with. If they have an employee ID, write what you talked about, write what agreements they made, what promises they made regarding a forbearance, what happens with the payments, what loan modification documents they need. We learned from the Great Recession that, people who documented their communications with their mortgage servicer were able to get relief when their mortgage servicer told them the wrong things. So you're going to definitely want to make sure that you write that down for the bare minimum, so that way you have it for your notes. A few more best practices: make sure you're tracking any foreclosure deadlines. If you are calling your mortgage servicer, trying to get a loan modification, send in those documents, and you get a notice of pre-foreclosure options, while you are dealing with both things, those foreclosure deadlines can sneak up on you real fast. So make sure that you're tracking when you receive a notice of pre-foreclosure options. You have 30 days to respond. Write down the date that you received that document, so that way you know your deadline. Another tip is to create an updated budget. We all know that things are pretty unstable right now. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but you can always create an updated budget based off what your circumstances are right now. So you can determine, can you afford your mortgage? What's going to be the plan in the future? Does it make more sense to do another forbearance right now or to apply for a loan modification? You're not going to know these things unless you know what your budget looks like. And there's a lot of great, free, credible financial counseling services out there. And if you need a recommendation on one of those, you're more than welcome to contact us. Another tip is speak with a housing counselor or an attorney about options early. The earlier you are in the foreclosure or the default process, the more options that you have available to you. If you're later in the stages of foreclosure right now, still talk to a housing counselor and an attorney just so you can see what your options are. But if you're early in the process, again, sooner you reach out, the more options you're going to have available. And my last tip is to make sure that you check your credit report. If you are behind on your mortgage, you're applying for that loan modification, or you are trying to get that payment deferral in place, check your credit report later. Your credit score doesn't matter at that point. Just make sure that you are following up on your loan modification, following up on that payment deferral, tracking your foreclosure deadlines. But if you are in a good place where your payments got deferred or your loan modifications accepted, check your credit report. Make sure that it reflects, your forbearance, that you were current during that forbearance, if you were current when it began. Make sure it reflects what your mortgage servicer has been telling you. All right, and next I'm going to open it up for questions. If you have any questions, please enter those in the chat box on your right. My first question is, how can I tell whether I have a Fannie Mae or a Freddie Mac loan? So Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are government-backed loans. And if you have one of these loans, it can be great because they have clear guidance online about what their forbearance and loss mitigation programs are. And you can tell whether you have one of these loans by going online. You can go to knowyouroptions.com/loan lookup for Fannie Mae, and for Freddie Mac, it is www.freddie.mac.com/loan lookup. You could also just Google these as well, Fannie Mae loan lookup or Freddie Mac loan lookup. If you're watching this video later, if you're here live, I will go ahead and post those links in our chat box. All right, and let's see if we have any more questions. My next question is, will Chapter 7 help save my home? And this is going to be the lawyer answer. It depends. Like I talked about with Chapter 13, there are many different factors that go into whether you should file bankruptcy or not. So you should really speak with an experienced bankruptcy attorney about whether Chapter 7 would be a good option for helping you save your home. Generally, Chapter 7 will pause or delay a foreclosure. Generally, there are some exceptions, but generally Chapter 7 will give you more time. It will discharge certain debt like credit card or medical debt. So if you have credit cards or medical bills that are impairing your ability to pay your mortgage, Chapter 7 might be a good option. But again, there's many factors that go into whether you should file bankruptcy and whether it's in your best interest. So I would highly recommend that you talk to a bankruptcy attorney very soon if that's an option that you're interested in. Definitely get advice before you file. All right, it doesn't look like we have any other questions tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and say, please join us for the next session in our Northwest Consumer Law Center webinar series. We are hosting these free webinars on the first and third Wednesday of every month starting at 6 p.m. You can follow us on Facebook or Twitter in order to get updates. And you can also look online at our website, northwestconsumerlawcenter.org/COVID-19. And if you are interested in getting in touch with us, our information is on this slide. If you're seeking help with a consumer legal issue, you're welcome to contact us to apply for our services. We're able to help those of low and moderate incomes in Washington State. You can apply online at northwestconsumerlawcenter.org/get-help or by phone at 206-805-1722. Our physical offices are still closed, but we are all working remotely right now. So we are in office between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. And you can get a hold of us using either our online intake form or calling us by phone to do the intake. If you have any questions about the presentation, please feel free to reach out, emailing us at admin@northwestconsumerlawcenter.com. If you're looking for additional resources like the forbearance webinar I mentioned, we also have a lot of other great webinars on student loans, bankruptcy, debt collection. You can go online and watch our webinar series at northwestconsumerlawcenter.org/COVID-19. And to learn more about our work, go to northwestconsumerlawcenter.org. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and take care.